After Final Fantasy VI, Squaresoft was on fire when it came to being a respected RPG development team. For the remainder of the 16-bit era, they worked on Super Mario RPG Legend of Seven Stars, Bahamut Lagoon, Front Mission, Secret of Evermore, and one of the greatest RPGs of all time in the eyes of many, Chrono Trigger. Dear God, if you wanted a team to give you top quality RPGs outside of Origin Systems or Enix, you would look to Squaresoft. These games were loved by hardcore, but they really needed a killer app to get them into mainstream gaming market. Insert here in 1997 for the PlayStation 1, Final Fantasy VII. When Squaresoft released Final Fantasy VII, it was a big deal. Hell, before this, the demo of it was put on Squaresoft's fighting game called Tobound No. 1, which also helped it sell pretty well, so we knew to some extent what we were getting into. If you didn't buy Tobound No. 1, on the other hand, they also did a really good job marketing the game. The game was sold like it was an epic movie in the form of a game, which was genius at the time, for at least PlayStation 1. Everything about the game screamed epic, from the revolutionary 3D graphics, to the story, the music, and so on. The game grabbed you by the balls and said, what in the world are you waiting for? Go get a PlayStation 1 and play it. If we're talking about it from a historical standpoint, the game had the hardcore scrambling to the door to get a copy, and they also did a really good job at bringing in new players. As for who worked on it, it was the usual suspects, with Yumi Matsu composing the classic soundtrack, Hironobu Sakaguchi as the producer, Yoshinori Kitase directed, and wrote along with a man who would go on to work on many other Squaresoft titles, and Kazuhige Ojima. The game became a massive hit and was loved around the world, with the game getting a Japan-only international version in October 1997, a PC CD-ROM release in '98, ported by Idols, released to the PlayStation Network in 2009, a release to Steam in 2013, and the fabled and always teased remake, which we have no idea if it's actually in the works or not. The game would also go on to sell more than 10 million copies worldwide, making it the most popular game in the franchise. Not to mention, it's considered one of the greatest RPGs of all time and got several sequels and or prequels to it. Yeah, so Final Fantasy VII is and was a big deal, so let's see why. Now, I'm not going to explain the plot of Final Fantasy VII. If you haven't played 7 and you are an RPG fan, or haven't heard the plot by now, go and play it right now. This was an incredible story that pretty much everyone should check out at least once. Not everyone will get it, but I think fans of the genre will see its quirks and either embrace it or accept the fact that it's almost 20 years old. The graphics are incredible for a 1997 game. If you ask me to recommend a version, then go get the Steam version if this is your first exposure to it. The game looks and runs best on Steam, plus you don't have to fool around with 3 discs. The world is huge and looks like a true next generation step forward compared to SNES or even early PlayStation 1 RPGs like Suikoden. Everything from the opening cinematic to when you go out and explore the world of Final Fantasy VII is absolutely incredible. Yet it hasn't aged well. But for a 1997 game, it was a game changer. Along with games like Metal Gear Solid and Resident Evil, the cinematic experience of a game was raised to a new level. When you break it down, fundamentally the game used 3D polygons in a 2D landscape. This put pretty much anything the Sega Saturn did to shame. While it wasn't a true 3D world, it was still an impressive achievement. Monsters looked awesome. Every battle feels epic and only added to the story's already strong plot. Characters are designed great and bosses got the same treatment. For 1997, every last bit of Final Fantasy VII really brought out the best of what the PlayStation 1 had to offer. There are problems like characters looking literally like a bunch of polygons grouped together, and it can be a chore to look at, but it's almost expected when the game is 18 years or older. Before I get into audio, I will warn you that there will be spoilers. Like I said before, if you haven't played it by now, go do it. There are plot elements I will mention to get a point across about how a scene is made even better, and this is the only way I know how to do so. Anyway, the audio is incredible. The music is pretty much perfect. This is probably one of the greatest soundtracks of all time. Every track fits so perfectly to every situation. Not to mention, some of the tracks can really get emotional and only added to how epic the story was at the time. Case in point, Eric's death. I know people are going to say this is the most overrated death scene of all time. In my opinion, it's far from it when you consider when it was released. Bear in mind, death in an epic RPG for a console was rare, and the way the whole thing was set up was really emotional. Eric was an integral part of the plot, and when Sephiroth killed her, it was a really emotional moment at the time. Combine it with the track that was played in the background, you got a moment that brought tears to a lot of gamers' eyes. Not to mention, it led to Sephiroth becoming one of the greatest bad guys not only in the series, but in video game history as far as I'm concerned. Sure, he has reasoning that was explained before this moment. The thing is, after all the lives he took, this was the last straw. You knew that if Sephiroth would kill the last known ancient who knew how to get to the Promised Land, then this guy had to be stopped no matter what. Every other track also did an incredible job of conveying the atmosphere at that point in the story. It's wrapped up with an amazing battle theme and one of the greatest final boss tracks ever, called One Winged Angel. One Winged Angel is by far one of the most expected songs to be played at any video game music concert, along with stuff like the Halo theme. This track is the best way to tell anyone you mean business, or better yet, this is your last chance to stop this big baddie. It's do or die time. Good luck, man. The track itself is as iconic as the game itself. If you can find the soundtrack, again, much like the game, go and get it. Some of the greatest video game music was written for this game. The gameplay is arguably the worst aged out of all the Final Fantasy PlayStation 1 games. The game isn't really anything you haven't seen before. You go from town to town fighting enemies and leveling up. The game scales back its battle system from a 5-member party to 3. The only trade-off is that outside of towns, as soon as you get to a certain point, you can switch between characters. You also get a new special attack called Limit Breaks. As you take damage, you fill a meter, and as soon as it's full, you can pull a heavy, damaging move. Each character has their own unique moves and has 4 levels of said limit breaks. The game also features a new magic spell system called Materia. Each weapon can equip a certain number of materia, and those materia have their own improvements and drawbacks. They can also be leveled up to unlock better spells, or in the case of the modifier materia called All, increase the number of times you can use spells on all of your enemies or allies. Outside of that, the combat is really the same classic combat engine as Final Fantasy 4 or 6. Another poorly aged level is the motorcycle chase. It's a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's a very cool level and brings back a lot of nostalgia. The problem is that it's starting to show its age. It controls fine, but its hit detection is very mediocre. I've seen many hits count as misses and vice versa. To top it all off, the camera flies all over the place and rarely gives a decent view. I think new players are probably going to be thankful it's only used once. As for all the other games, they aren't an integral part of the game. Unless you want everything in the game, you can go ahead and skip them. They're built more so as time wasters, like a ring toss game at Carnival. When I played games like Final Fantasy as a kid, I went by a rule of thumb to lower how much I grinded. I usually went and grinded till my party needed 10 fights, or 10x as I like to call it, till the next level up. It was a way to keep me from getting bored and blowing through games. Final Fantasy VII has challenging fights, but if you grind till you need 10 fights to the next level, you're more likely than not blow through a lot of them. Not only because of how big the increases to the level ups are, more so the game hands you items that at times makes fights piss easy. Seriously, you get the blue ring that absorbs water attacks in the dungeon when Eric dies and makes the boss fight of the dungeon pointless. There are maybe 1 or 2 other really good examples of it, but not to mention most boss fights are jokes. Unless you're a newcomer to the series, there are very few battles that will give you any challenge. It might be because I've played Final Fantasy most of my life, yet I still feel that any gamer with experience in this genre will blow through a lot of the fights in Final Fantasy VII. Another minor problem I have is exploring the world. When running around, the game suffers from Resident Evil syndrome. Now, the reason why I call it Resident Evil syndrome is because it's on a predefined camera angle. To keep it short, the game has you run around on a 2D plane with 3D polygons. While it doesn't change the camera angle every 20 feet, this can lead you to missing things that if the game had a real camera angle, you really wouldn't. While it can be a pain at times, when you consider its age, it kinda has to be expected. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad game. The game's solid and really feels like an evolution of the active time battle system. There's a lot of solid elements to Final Fantasy VII. Boss fights still feel like a lot is on the line, and story, while dated, is an epic tale that others would follow in its footsteps. The problem is that it has aged so poorly that if time didn't take the ugly stick to it, I'd say it's a top 10 greatest RPG of all time. The problem is, while it's a really solid game, it's not top 10 greatest RPG of all time. Like, I can name 5 RPGs on the PlayStation 1 that were better than that. Those are Final Fantasy 9, Suikoden 1, Suikoden 2, Xenogears, and Parasite Eve. Those are the games that come to mind right now. It's still solid, but you fanboys got to expand your horizons past Final Fantasy 7 as, you know, the greatest PlayStation 1 RPG of all time, let alone the greatest RPG of all time. Overall, Final Fantasy 7 is an important yet overrated game in JRPG history. It set a standard for RPGs to follow, yet over time hasn't aged well. It's still a solid game that both older and new fans will enjoy. Just go into it with a completely open mind and zero expectations. Not to mention, if you're a fan, I'll give you 40 hours to go play it. This is a game that led to many more classics that I'll go into later. I give it an 8.5 out of 10.